Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome to the Eretz Chemda Beit Midrash. A few people coming on now. Baruch Hashem, we have a few people here in the Beit Midrash. This is the really, we call it the Yiboneh Beit Midrash, but we're not here. We're not in the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. We are guests. We are grateful guests in Eretz Chemda. And for those who are not familiar, we use the Yakar to explain very important points. This is very spiritually heavy, inspiring, also very textual. Tonight is actually we're going to use a short text, but we have a lot to say about it. So for those who are unfamiliar, in the description box below, you can get a hold of the original Hebrew text that we're using, and I really suggest you do so, because it's really almost impossible to really understand what's happening in the Parsha without seeing the Hebrew personally. I want to start off by mentioning a special prayer, a Refuah Shelema for Notah and Ben Zeisel. And of course, last week we gave a shout out, mamash, to Hashem for the refuah for our soldiers, the protection of our soldiers. And we're going to discuss that a little bit tonight. I want to mention about Achdut and how important Achdut is. Achdut means unity, the unity of the Jewish people. That's been quite the theme for the last few weeks. And specifically, I just want to mention what I mentioned on Shabbat at our table about Lashon Hara, right? If Achdut is unity, and it's so important, in other words, right, we say Nenetzach, right, Yakar Nenetzach, only if we're together will we win. It's not an empty slogan. Lashon Hara are the beginnings of the cracks, and maybe even further in disrupting and breaking down the unity of the nation. So I just want to mention that in last week's Parshas, in Emor, in the Midrash, it actually brings these words that by King David actually prayed that the soldiers would not die in battle, and still many of them did die, unfortunately, and that's because the Midrash says there were tale-bearers among them, and they would fall in battle. So to protect our soldiers, we must figure out, we must not only learn, Yehuda, we must not only learn, but practice, right? So the Midrash ends like this over there, Avodorsha Achav, the Achav, King Ahab, I think that's how they pronounce it in English. He was an idol worship. He was not such a holy man. In fact, he was a very evil king, and yet, you know what the Midrash says? Because they were not talebearers, they went out to war, and yet they were victorious. They were victorious not because they were sinners. In fact, they were sinners, but they were victorious because they refrained from Lashon Hara. In other words, there was Achdus. There was a sense of Achdus. And Hashem created for us, and on October 7th, a sense of Achdus through the tragedy that took place. And we should not forget, our soldiers are on the front line fighting for our survival. And if we're behind the lines, causing trouble, speaking Lashon Hara, causing disunity, we're not doing them any favors. That's for sure. We could be on the front lines with them by praying, learning Torah, and for sure by not speaking Lashon Hara. And that, because Lag BaOmer, it's especially true. Lag BaOmer is Motzi Shabbat, Saturday night, and it's not just about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's about his Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva actually taught Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai everything he knows, right? I mean, besides the fact that he learned on his own in the cave with his son, but his Rebbe, and what was his Rebbe known for, Rabbi Akiva? to tell us that the most important klal gadol, one of the most important all-encompassing mitzvahs in the Torah is the ahavta l'reacha chamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. So on this 33rd day of the Omer, which is coming up, it should be infused with this whole concept of ahava. And that brings me to the next point. Our organization is called Yiboneh. Yes, Yiboneh. There's a famous expression, Olam Chesed Yiboneh. Hashem built the world with kindness. I'll just give you an example. If you want to know what the Bible is about, you want to know what God's about, look in the beginning, look at the end, and you can figure out everything in between is under that theme. So Hashem, He brought Adam, his wife. That's a big chesed. For those who aren't married and don't understand that, okay, He clothed the naked. He clothed the naked. That's a big chesed. And at the end of the Torah, that Moses was buried by God Himself. God involved Himself in chesed shelemis, the real true way of doing kindness. So the whole Torah, if you look at the first major act and the last major act, you could figure out all the acts in between are based on this idea. We're supposed to follow in God's ways. So this leads to the next idea that I just want to mention, that we've collected your money. We have, people have donated for tefillin, and we've sent over 70 pairs of tefillin to the front lines for our soldiers, who, many of them are not religious, who feel part of Am Yisrael. Just like we are appreciative of them, they're also understanding the importance of Achdus and feeling part of the Jewish nation and taking on Jewish unity and Jewish identity and wearing tefillin. So they're not cheap. They don't come cheap, And it's through your donations. We have already contributed over 70 pair. So I just want to thank you and anybody who would like to contribute through Chesed, and we're going to learn about this today. This whole class is about Chesed. We'll see soon. Can donate through the link below. We're going to deal with chapter 25, verse 25, in the Yakar. And the verse says like this: if your brother becomes destitute, ki yamuch achicha. Yamuch is like namuch, going down, or even crushed. He's feeling. Listen, financially he's feeling it, okay? He's feeling crushed. He's destitute. Umachar me'achuzato. By the time he feels this devastation on a financial level, he's ready and prepared to sell some of his property. Now, real estate doesn't come cheap here in Israel. We all know that. But more than that, it's handed down through families. As we see this Parshat is dealing with Shemitah and Yovel in the beginning of chapter 25. We're towards the end of 25. We're going to see there's actually a very strong connection between keeping the laws of Shemitah and Jubilee to what? To poverty or to wealth. Okay, there's a very strong connection between observing and keeping Shemitah and Yovel to wealth and poverty. There's a connection. So in verse 25, if your brother becomes destitute and sells some of his inherited property, okay, it says me achuzato, from his property. So he's not selling his entire property. So then what happens? His closest relatives, charity begins at home. His closest relative who's related to him shall come forth and redeem his brother. Well, redeem his brother's sale. The truth is, it should never have to come to that he sells it. When already somebody is becoming in the beginning stages of financial troubles, people should come to his assistance, and we will see exactly why that's important. You can guess now, but I'll tell you. That if the worse somebody's financial situation is, the harder it is to pick him up. So you grab it in the beginning and it doesn't get so bad. Okay, it's a very important concept and we'll see it more in detail. But based on this idea, Rashi says, this teaches us that a person may not sell his field, his property, his inherited property, which he makes parnasa, that's where his his money comes from, except when under the pressure of poverty. So hopefully the family comes and helps him with a job, teaches him a trade, does something, set him up in business, so he doesn't get to this point. So somebody has to sell part of their field. Never sell all your real estate. Keep some of it. That's the first lesson. Also, it says, right, some of it, but not all of it, Rashi says. The Torah is teaching us proper conduct. That if you do have to sell, at least leave over some of it for yourself. And the last point, and redeem his brother's sale, meaning the closest relative, that the purchaser, the actual person who bought the property, cannot impede the redemption. Now, for those who are not familiar, we're talking about inherited property. By the Jubilee, it goes back into the original person's possession. So, for example, we're saying it happens every 50 years that it reverts back into the original person's possession. So basically, if the person is down and out, needs some money, what he'll do is called a lease. He's not even really selling the property, but because he's selling it only for a certain period of time. It's true that it's really in the other person's name during that time until the Jubilee. But it's kind of like a lease. And why do I say that? So let's take some roundabout numbers. So you're not selling the property forever. You're only selling it for 25 years. If it's a 25-year lease, 25 years until the next Shemitah year. So let's just work with $1,000. So if you sold it for $25,000 and the brother or the cousin comes to redeem it, so if 15 years in, he'll sell it back to him. The new purchaser has to sell it back. He has to sell it back for $10,000, right? You're not going to get the full amount, and you're not going to get less. You're going to get what's worth of the lease that's still unused, okay? So it has to be done fairly, and the purchaser has to allow the property to go back, even though there's still 10 years left on the lease, even though he still has in his possession that $10,000, he should give that $10,000 back, and then the property is redeemed. Okay, the Yakar begins by telling us a medrash, and this medrash I copied over, I believe it is number 2 on the source sheet. It's telling us about the smichut of parshiot. What's smichut? It means the close proximity. Juxtaposition or close proximity. You have all the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, and then right away, the next subject is your brother, your friend, your neighbor is impoverished. So what does the Medrash say? The Darshu kol smichut parshiot elu al oisei schora bepeiros shel shvi'it. Okay, this is a little bit complicated. During Shemitah, you open up your fields and anybody can come in and take. It's hefker lekol. It's ownerless and anybody can take. I'm not going to say as much as they want. They cannot take as much as they want. They can only take up to the amount of 3 meals per day. Right? That's how. And if you have 30 people in your family, you're responsible. So you can take 90 meals per day. Okay? But what happens is this. If you're the landowner and you decide, or even if you're not, you're going to someone's field and taking and harvesting a lot, and you're selling it on the open market. So there's something wrong with that. You're not supposed to do business with Kedushat Shvit, with the fruit that's grown during the Shemitah year. You're supposed to only sell it, you're allowed to sell it only for the amount of money it takes to harvest. So in other words, there's Otzer based in. The based in comes and they hire people who will harvest. And let's say there's also transportation costs. So we're talking about bare minimum. So if normally, let's say apples are $5 a pound, so this Shemitah year it's only $1 a pound because you had to hire people so it doesn't rot on the trees. You had to hire people to get it to the market, so you have gas and you have a truck driver and whatnot. So they're actually supposed to be much cheaper. But that's it. That money that you spend is just under Otzer based in the cost to get it to the market. Anything above that is tainted. It's so tainted that the money you spend and give to the guy, to the fruit salesman, is problematic. It's holding on to this impure it's really actually pure. It's holding on to the holiness of the Kedushat Shvit, which you're not allowed to benefit from. And it's going to be on that money forever. So it is a problem. So, but in general, the concept is it's a problem. You're not allowed to make money off of the fruits of Shemitah. And yet someone's doing this. So what's going to be the end? Shesofo levo lide oni. The person trying to become rich will actually become impoverished. And that, in the English, if you look at number 2, I'll read it to you. There's a verse in Proverbs 28:22. An evil-eyed person moves quickly after wealth. Nivha lahon, someone who's quick to become rich, he's ish ra'ah ayin. He happens to be this evil-eyed person who's moving quickly after wealth. We're going to see the next few words, even though the next few words are not brought till later in the Medrash. Lo yoda ki chaser. He doesn't realize all of the lack that's going to come to him. Okay, so the first part is the evil-eyed person moves quickly after his wealth. This represents those who engage in business in the sabbatical year, in that they think, right, their goal is to quickly move to become rich. Meaning they do not observe the sabbatical year, and they think they will become rich. What does Hashem do? The Holy One, blessed be He, said to them, by your life, meaning I swear, you will have a loss in the matter. Since he did not observe the sabbatical year, the curse, the avak, the dust of the sin of what he did, began entering into his money, and he has to end up selling all that he had. So what is this Medrash telling us? Why is there this smichut, this proximity of the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, and then all of a sudden now you have this impoverished person being discussed and all the laws thereof. So we have in verse 2, right, in the beginning of chapter 25, that the land shall observe a Sabbath for the Lord. Don't work the land. V'shavta aret Shabbat laHashem. It has to rest. And then right afterwards, already in verse 14, which we will see, when you sell property, when the person becomes impoverished and needs to sell his property. And we're going to look at it right now, even though, actually the clear card brings it down. He says, V'yesh, it's the third line down, V'yesh kidmut raya lezeh. There's either an example or a similar, that's what an example is, a similar example to this proof. And that's the verse 14 where it says, V'chi timcharu mimchar. Now, in modern Hebrew, I don't know if you would talk like this, it's very Shakespearean, but it says in English, and you cannot really tell the double language of mechira in the English, unless you want to translate it, when you surely make a sale to your fellow Jew. Usually the double language is like a surely, like it's a real emphasis. But I don't see that in the English. It says when you make a sale to your fellow Jew or make a purchase from the hand of your fellow Jew. V'chi timcharu mimchar la'amitecha. When you sell the saleable item to your... Now the truth is we're talking about movables. And I just want to give you like a rundown. In 14 we're going to talk about movables. Then we're going to talk about real estate. And then we're going to talk, meaning the person becomes impoverished, that he has to sell his real estate, like we talked about the field. And then later on, it's where the person is so impoverished, he sells himself as a slave. There's a progression. I don't know if you noticed. First, it's movable. So this verse 14, and it even says, a purchase from the hand of your fellow. Miyad, konen miyad. But here, even in the double language, timcharu mimchar, Rashi says, I'm pretty sure it's the Rashi, but maybe it's the Medrash, we'll get to it. It's like it's a causing of more sale. There's a slow progression of degradation financially, of going down to a lower point on the financial scale by selling more. You sell first the movables, metatalin, that's what it's called in Hebrew, then the sadeh, the field, then maybe your house. Hopefully your house is next to your field. And then lastly, God forbid, selling yourself as a slave, which is like probably really degrading. It's probably a very uncomfortable situation. And now you understand, maybe in the beginning we're going to see where Rashi says, this is the time to help him. And he gives an example. if a donkey has a load on its back and it falls, so if you can straighten it up while it's still you see that it's falling, it's faltering. If you can straighten it up and tie it down correctly, you're way better off than later on after it falls. Even 5 people, while the load is on the donkey, won't even be able to lift up the donkey. Okay, so let's go back into the Yakar. 3rd line down, we use this verse. V'chi timcharu mimchar. He says this is an example to his thesis. And he says, kefel lashon mechira. You notice that there's a double language of sale, which I mentioned already. Number 1, it usually means surely. But in this case, he says, lo imer lecha. Why is it a double language of mechira, of sale? Shemimchar echad goyrer et chavero. That one sale is going to cause to follow another. Ki timcharu pero shvi'it, and this is where it really nails it down. Because what did you do? You sold your Shemitah fruits, which you shouldn't have. That was already the first stage. You wanted wealth quickly, and we saw as a result of chasing after wealth, the opposite's going to happen. Az mechira zu, that sale of the Shemitah fruits, goreret mimchar metatalin lamitecha. That's causing the sale of the movables, metatalin, the movable goods to your friend. I do want to look at that Rashi on number 3. I don't think we did that Rashi yet. So I want to see the rest of the verse. V'chitim kru mimchar lamitecha, o koneh miyad amitecha, and then it says, al tono ish es achiv. That last part, you're not allowed to wrong another, but it's usually in lo sonu is you're not allowed to speak disparagingly to another human being. So the truth is, it's actually used in Leviticus 19:33. No, actually, it's I think it is Leviticus. Do not. I don't know where it is. Let me just sure it is. Okay. You're not allowed to taunt words to a ger, someone who converted. How much more so? I mean, to anybody else, but you're not. But you have 36 special warnings how to treat a ger. So the Torah goes out of its way. Don't use words that can hurt somebody, especially to those. It also says about a widow and an orphan. Anybody who's vulnerable, people who I guess that's the most vulnerable people of society. Okay, they don't have the clan, the family to come to their defense in most cases. So, but it means don't wrong somebody. So in business, there is a halacha, you're not allowed to charge more than 1/6 the price of the market value. Why is that? Listen, when it comes to real estate, there is no such thing. What do they call it? Location, location, location. Every property is unique, and if someone's willing to pay for that view, or for that tree, or, you know what I'm saying, that parking spot. Okay? But let's say, for example, you're selling ice pops. Ice pops, they call us a shekel. But you're in the Golan Heights, at the end of a long 6-hour hike. I think that guy can sell them for 3 shekels, which is 200%. Am I right? Or 300%. The point is this. Under normal circumstances, it would be forbidden to 1/6 above the market price. That's what's included in this particular mitzvah. Okay, the last thing, and you shall not wrong, this means wronging through money, which is basically what I just explained. Okay, so back into the Yakar. We're only 4 lines in, 5 lines in. Okay, so the first thing we said was if you sell if you sell or you're involved in business with the fruits of Shemitah year, that's going to cause you to become impoverished, and then you're going to end up selling the metatalin, va'achar kach sadehu, and then afterwards, God forbid, your property, your inherited property, va'achar kach atzmo, and afterwards the person may end up selling himself, va'achar kach lager. So 1 second. Selling yourself, meaning selling yourself to a Jew. You become a Jewish slave. All the laws of a Jewish slave apply to you. By the way, many people have no clue what I'm even talking about. A Jewish slave, you're not allowed to work a Jewish slave like a slave. So there is slavery in Judaism. A Jewish slave is only sold by the Beis Din because he either owes a lot of money because he stole something and can't afford to pay it back, or he's just really impoverished. So a wealthy family, a family that can actually afford to get him out of his debt, will buy him through the Beis Din, or he sold himself, and then they have to treat him with utmost respect. They can't even ask him to do something that they themselves wouldn't do. So, like tonight I cleaned the drain in my house. I could ask, if I could do it, I could certainly ask it's more like an indentured servant. Did that make any sense? I don't know if that makes it any better. But basically, if you have only one pillow, you have to give it to him. Okay? If he's sold into slavery with his whole family, you bring the whole family. Okay? It's rehabilitation. Hopefully he'll learn a trade, he'll learn something, whether it's carpentry or salesman, whatever it is, he'll hopefully learn a trade. And when he's released, you give him a gift. You give him, in Hebrew we call pitsuim, like when you leave a job after X amount of years, so you're getting a new start. So this is a great chesed that a family could do to someone who's impoverished, go to the Beis Din and say, we're willing to take a pet project, so to speak, to help rehabilitate somebody. But then the next thing is to a ger. Now, we're going to discuss this. The word ger can mean a righteous convert. It could mean a non-Jew. In this case, we're talking about a non-Jew. And we're going to see the difference between a ger and a toshav and a ger toshav. We're going to see those words appear. So right now, this is talking about it to a non-Jew. So either you're selling yourself, and that's a really bad situation, because they don't have all the laws of the owner, the Jewish owner of a Jewish slave, of how to treat him. You're talking about a non-Jew who's taken and purchased a Jew, and that's like even a lower level, right? We talked about having to sell your family heirlooms, then selling your family fields, and then we're talking about selling yourself to a Jew, and then even worse, selling yourself to a foreign nation, perhaps. Ki kol echad kasha mishilafanav. Each one is more difficult than the one before it. And that is the pattern you will see throughout this Parsha, towards the last few verses in chapter 25. Now the next paragraph says Vinira. Let's see. I want to show you something. You must, it seems, Kishinoi halashon, there are strange anomalies. There are certain changes in the languages and expressions Shebekol Parshiot Elu Mora Alzeh. Throughout the Parsha, they actually teach this idea. So what he's doing is, he's letting you know, I got proof for everything I said. I'm not making any of this up. Kiba Machirat Mitatalim, in the very beginning, right? And when the person is down and out, meaning in the very beginning stages, he's not really down yet, but he's tottering. He's selling his movables. We're not talking about real estate. We're talking about the movables. Lo hiskir, it doesn't even mention, and this is verse 14, it doesn't say the words ki yamuch, when he is downtrodden. Those words don't appear, because he is not yet. Ki yachaliyot, and the Yakar says, very possible, shalifamim adam moiche metatalav, that when there are times that a person sells his movables, again, which could be heirlooms, when does he sell some of his movables? When he's not yet diminished in value so much. That's the best translation. Ela shehu nitzrak lezuze. He just needs some money. Now there's a period. Aval me'achuzato. But when it comes to real estate, right, this heritage, the property he received from his ancestors, afilu miktzata, even just some of it, Eino, you don't have to turn pages. I put you're all in one page. You don't have to turn pages. Oh, maybe the English. He's moicher ad ki yamuch, which means when it comes to real estate, that's when you're really going to be experiencing a much more difficult financial state. I do want to, did we read the Rashi in number 3 yet? Look at source number 3. We're talking about the metatalin. And Rashi says, its simple meaning is obvious. This verse can also be expounded to teach us the following lesson. How do we know that when you wish to sell, you should sell to your fellow Jew? The actual Torah says, when you sell to your fellow Jew. That's exactly what the Torah says. So we have, if you're limited in what you sell and there are Jews that need it, you have to sell to your fellow Jew. It's a chesed. It's a kindness. And Scripture says, Ki timkru michal amitecha. And when you make the sale, you sell to your fellow Jew. Now, how do we know that if you come to buy, now that's the seller. What about the purchaser? You know there's a halacha. Now, that's if the product and the price are the same. Okay? You want to buy something, you have to buy from your fellow Jew. This is going to be very important in a point later I'm going to make. Now, if it's a better product or it's much cheaper, you're certainly allowed to buy it from the non-Jew. I do want to mention, what is this idea? We're going to get into it, and I want you to stay tuned. When you lend money to a Jew, you're not allowed to charge interest. When it comes to lending money to a non-Jew, it implies you must charge interest. Why? Now, this has been a very difficult thing to explain for thousands of years, and I'm going to explain it, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, the Yakar gives his idea, and I'm going to add to it. So, when you're purchasing or when you're selling, your main business should be with Jews, and then with non-Jews afterwards. Let's go back into the Yakar. He basically said, when it comes to selling real estate, you're already impoverished. But he's not entirely on the lowest level yet. His hand hasn't faltered entirely. Because the man is not on the lowest rung, the Torah is warning us, don't charge him ribbit. Ribbit means interest. Obviously, right, you're not going to try to get money out of a stone. What do they call it? Blood out of a stone or water out of a stone? I wonder where they got that from. Can't get water out of a stone. No, blood out of a stone. So here you have a person who needs money, but he's not entirely financially stripped. You might take advantage thinking you could get ribbis. But the Torah says, Ki yamuch achicha, this is verse 35, umata yado imach. So in verse 35, which you'll find, number 5 on the source sheet, so if your brother becomes destitute and his hand falters before you, you shall support him, whether a convert or a resident, so that he can live with you. Now, how do I know it's a convert, besides the fact that that Chabad translated as a convert? Look in the Hebrew, it says ger vitoshav. A ger, that's the non-Jew who totally converted. We call him a ger tzedek. He's 100% Jewish. And a toshav. Two separate things. Later on, we're going to see ger toshav is a non-Jew. Ger vitoshav is a ger tzedek, a righteous Gentile, a Jew, a Gentile who converted fully to be Jewish. They're Jewish 100%. And so if your brother becomes destitute and his hand falters, beside you, now that's also an important, it says imach. I don't know if I would translate it beside you. I would say with you. You shall support him. He is with you. We're going to see that in the Yakar, very important. This is the beginning. This is before his total downfall. Rashi says you shall support him. And he says the words that I quoted earlier. Do not allow him to fall down and collapse altogether, in which case it would be difficult to pick him up again from his dire poverty. Rather, what you should do is support him, lift him up while you're with him, while his hand is still faltering, for then it is easier to help him out of his trouble. To what can this be compared? To a load on a donkey. Now, while it's still on the donkey, one person can grasp it and hold it in its place. It seems to be falling, you can tighten the belt. But once it falls to the ground, however, even 5 people cannot pick it up. Continue in the Rashi. When we said it's a ger vitoshav, a convert and or a resident. So even if he is a ger or a resident, that means 2 people. What is a resident? So a resident, the toshav, is any non-Jew who's accepted upon himself not to worship idols, but eats non-kosher meat. By the way, so there are 7 rules, 7 laws for a righteous Noahide. One of them is, according to Rabbi Meir, the most important. They're all important, but I think the thing that really makes or breaks a righteous Gentile, a Noahide, is getting rid of his idols, getting rid of this idea of idol worship, that there's only one true God, the true God of Israel, the one God of Israel, and everything that the Torah says, and that the Jews have a special mission, and these people are committed to helping the Jews, meaning helping the Torah come to fruition. The Rashi continues. So these people are called residents. They are permitted to reside permanently in the land of Israel. They're actually called, there's a ger, and then there's a toshav. The toshav is referring to a ger toshav. And by the way, I might as well talk about it. A ger toshav is only applicable in its fullest when we have the Jubilee year, which we're going to talk about soon. So in other words, we don't observe the Jubilee year today, and the concept of ger toshav is not applicable in its fullest sense. So non-Jews cannot just come and say, hey, I keep the 7 Noahide laws, I want to live in the land of Israel. I wish that were the case. But God has his wisdom. It's only going to apply when a majority of Jews live in the land of Israel. And I think it's kind of obvious. We don't want them, even though they're non-Jews who are righteous and love the Torah and love the Jewish people. They wouldn't want to be here and live with us and keep the 7 laws, but they still have a foreign influence. So you have to have a majority of Jews to somehow offset that influence. So to me, it makes sense. But that's just me. And we're going to talk about it. So ger toshav is only when we observe Yovel. However, I do want to mention that there are beis dinim, and I think it's a great idea, where a non-Jew who, righteous Gentile, can go in front of a court of 3 Jews and publicly proclaim that they are willing to do everything they can. They accept upon themselves there's one God, the God of Israel, and they accept the Torah as the truth, and they want to keep the 7 laws. So, kol kavod. I really think that since we don't have Yovel, that it's the best thing to do. I don't see the problem with that. I think it's a great thing. And it's like preparation, because we're all preparing. As soon as a majority of the Jews will live in the land, it can happen. We'll talk about it. It doesn't seem so simple. Later on, you'll see there's a lot of conditions to keeping Yovel, but that is a major one. While Yovel is not fully in play, there's no real ger toshav today, but we could try. That's the main thing. So the Yakar was saying about this idea that the Torah is now telling you, don't take ribbis from this guy. Because the Lashon, we're second, my page, Kasav Lashon Imach. It says with you. That's what it says. It's with you. Al hitmotetut. While he is unstable, while he's tottering, before he has fallen, he's still standing, so to speak. Lo al, and is not going the words ki yamuch he's not yet at his lowest point. Kidavar zeh gilo imach. Now this thing is quite obvious to you. Number two, right? Don't charge him ribbis, but you see that he's not yet totally downtrodden. Ki azlat yad kocho az enoata. It's just going to flow continuously in that direction unless you help him. Avamashu mach, but whatever level, when he gets really, when he gets really down, just think about this, like mach, we said, is unstable. But adayin eno imach. So once he gets to this point, then he's no longer imach. He's not with you. Ki adayin lo tigale cherpato bekahal kimachu. So there's like this level where if he's just selling his metatalin, or he's just selling some of his real estate, you really got to do everything you can to help him, but he hasn't yet reached the level of shame that we're going to describe shortly. And that would be when he sells himself. Then it's public knowledge. Now we do have this idea, when you sell real estate, well, it does become public knowledge. In other words, today we have offices, we have computers, and there are titles. There's even title insurance because people aren't always on the up and up. So you have to check the deeds. Back in the day, it was really word of mouth. People knew when you lived in a place. They knew their neighbors. They knew who was living there, who was squatting. And they would tell them, hey, this property has been in this family for generations. So it's not like you had an office to go to look up a deed. It was somewhat public knowledge when a real estate sale went through. But nevertheless, what really becomes public knowledge is when you sell yourself. Aval b'mocher atzmo, when the person ends up selling himself as a slave, shakasha mikulam. This is the most difficult of all of what we described above. And in verse 39, look in 39. And if your brother, it's number 6 on the source sheet, it's Leviticus 25:39. And if your brother becomes destitute with you and is sold to you, you do not work him with slave labor. By the way, so what is that? Degrading work. You're not allowed to give him degrading work through which he is made to look like a slave. I told you, it's more like an indentured worker. He must not carry. You can't have him follow after you to the mikveh carrying your clothes or to put on your shoes. Of course, you're an older person. You can ask nicely. I'm sure he'll do it. But you don't give him the degrading work, anything that you wouldn't do yourself. So the Yakar continues, as the person who sold himself into slavery, kavar nigla imach einyo umerudo v'tachacho. Because when you sell yourself into slavery, then it's already revealed with you about his poverty, his impoverished state, and his crushed and his ragged and pushed financial position. After the fact that he was forced to sell himself into slavery. And now what's even worse than that? When he sells himself to a non-Jew. When he finally, it's revealed, when he sold himself to a ger, it's obvious. And the ger, this non-Jew, is aware of the fact this Jew is really down and out. Very interesting. How does a non-Jew living in Israel become wealthy? There is, I want to look at number 7. It's Leviticus 25:47. If a resident non-Jew, so in Hebrew it's a ger, vitoshav here, gains wealth with you, and your brother becomes destitute with him, then it says, and he's sold to a resident non-Jew. So in the Hebrew, right there, it says, v'nimchar leger toshav. It doesn't say ger vitoshav. So the first part was either a ger, a non-Jew. I'm sorry, a ger here is the first time it says ger, is the ger tzedek, the righteous Gentile who became Jewish 100%, and a toshav. But later on in the verse, it just says ger toshav without the vav. And we'll see Rashi. It even says about this non-Jew you sold him to, or he sold himself to, among you or to an idol of the family of a non-Jew. Let's look at it, and it says, Yakar, mishpachat ger. Let's just look. That's obviously not talking about a Jewish convert, okay? Look at Rashi. What does it mean, a resident non-Jew? Ger toshav. Ger vitoshav. So he says there, a stranger who is a resident, toshav, here meaning a non-Jew. And even the Targum Onkelos says, aral totav. And aral means an uncircumcised resident. Now at the end of the verse, it proves that this is one particular person. So I stand corrected. In the beginning, it seems like it's two different people. But at the end, it comes back and it's talking about the one non-Jewish owner of this slave, of this Jewish slave. So at the end of the verse, it proves that it's one person when it continues, v'nimchar leger toshav without the vav. So it's going back on the beginning. If a resident non-Jew gains wealth, I asked, how did he gain wealth? What caused him, Rashi asked, what caused him to become wealthy? I would say drum roll please, but nobody has any tables here. His connection with you. He gained wealth through the blessing of the Jewish people. Okay? Keep that in mind for all you Noahides. I know you're online there. All you Noahides, right? You righteous Gentiles, you. Right? You want to become wealthy? There's a blessing through the blessing of the Jewish people. Now, what if your brother became destitute with him? So the Jew, he's your brother, he became destitute. What caused his destitution? So this is a little bit degrading, and this means when he hung around with non-Jews, what caused his destitution? His connection with him, because he learned from his deeds. We're not talking about we're not talking about the righteous Gentile at this point. We're talking about non-Jews. What about we said about the family of a non-Jew? So the word la'akar means to uproot. So it's an expression. The expression means the Jew is sold to an idolater. When the scripture says la'akar, literally means to uproot, making it la'akar mishpachat ger. It refers to the Jew who is sold to the idol itself, meaning that thing which is uprooted, you become the attendant to it. Doesn't mean you worship it as a deity, but you could end up chopping wood and drawing water for that idol. Now that's as far as this source sheet goes. I have some other things I still want to add on here. The Yakar then continues, and he says, we're like 2 lines from the bottom, I think. Like we said in verse 47, Lekach Amar umach achicha imo. So in verse 47, right, your brother became destitute with him. It says with him. So it says imo. I just want to go back to 47, right? It says your brother became destitute with him. All along it was talking about with you, imach. All of a sudden now he's sold to the goy and he's destitute with him. So there's a change up in the language. What does that mean? Therefore, we need to say, by necessity, Shemicha Gerua Mimata Yado, that this level of destitution, where he sold himself to a non-Jew, is worse than just tottering and on his way down. Shneim ke'echad gruim min achas mehem. One of them is worse than all the rest. And that's imach, when it says with you, shalmicha gerua min imach shalmata yado. I'm not sure exactly how I can translate this to make sense, but he's telling you the word imach was used several times. That's where the person is still on their way down, but there are levels. It's going down, down, down. The tottering, the instability financially is going to continue. That's your chance. He's still with you to help him. But once he's once he's with the non-Jew, that is, I'm not going to say it's beyond help, but it's really worse than everything we mentioned above. So now I just want to speak a little bit about how this all relates to Shemitah and the Jubilee. I have met many Messianic, they're really Christians. They're not even Jewish. They're They call them Messianic Jews. But and they tell me they have farms in Texas, and they keep Shemitah, and they think I'm going to be impressed. The only thing I'm impressed with is their ignorance and their inability. I think that they really love the Torah so much. They want to keep it, but they're making and inventing their own religion. The Jews, right? We don't keep Shemitah according to the Torah today because it's tied in with Yovel. It's tied in with a whole bunch of other things. And I'm going to explain that Shemitah is only observed from the Torah when Yovel is observed. So you're going to ask me, so is Yovel observed? We'll talk about it in a second. So what we do today is we're practicing Shemitah in the land of Israel. The actual Torah says it's only applicable. The Torah itself says it's only applicable in the land of Israel. In fact, where are you going to get your fruits and vegetables during Shemitah? Truth is, we rely on Hashem. He'll give a blessing in the 6th year, according to the Yakar, that your 6th year produce will last you 3 years. Not that there's an abundance. Just think about this a second. If on the 6th year you had triple the amount of work and you had to build silos to handle all that, to me that would be like a curse. But Hashem does us a favor. He creates a miracle within a miracle within a miracle. He gives us in the 6th year, first of all, most non-Jews, they do crop rotation because they believe that the minerals are diminished and it's going to go down in quality. God says 6 years straight you're going to work. Don't do this hocus pocus with the crop rotation. I promise you, in the 6th year it won't diminish. And not only did it not diminish, but then we get enough for 3 years, meaning, according to the Yakar, that it will be preserved, you don't have to work so hard, and that the miracle happens within your stomach, that you'll eat a third less of what you normally eat, and you'll be totally satisfied. I actually forgot a very important part that I just want to add and splice in to this class, that in terms of giving loans to non-Jews, even though it's permissible and encouraged in terms of taking interest, it is a moral quandary. So the Talmud actually discourages it because of our involvement with the non-Jews that we may learn from their behavior, which is not so good. However, Torah scholars, people who are really keeping the Torah in an exemplary fashion, the Torah is not going to discourage. In other words, they won't learn from the bad behavior of the non-Jews. So Torah scholars are certainly allowed to charge interest to non-Jews, meaning give loans, whereas everyone else is discouraged from giving loans altogether because of the automatic involvement with the non-Jews. Now, what I failed to add in, a very important thing, is why is it that when it comes to non-Jews, we should charge them interest, whereas to a Jew, we do not? And one of the lessons that I learned, Rabbi Yochanan Zweig, he should live and be well, from Miami Beach, the Rosh Hashiva, he explained, and I want to just give a little bit of a preamble, and this also works with our army. Okay, we're not a Torah army per se, but we're Jews, and we are the most moral army in the world. And there are going to be tremendous amount of lessons from this war that the world will learn from, how to do war and what not to do. So lessons will be learned. But most important, when it comes to how to treat your neighbor. So the Jews, there's nothing like the Jewish people and how they treat each other. In other words, I think the whole world knows, what's so unique about the Jews? They really take care of each other. And just try to imagine that the Jews gave also non-interest loans. In other words, a free loan society where we would loan money to non-Jews, interest-free. Would the world understand how to treat their brother? No, I don't think so. And I think the Rabbi Yochanan was correct. The very fact that we do not charge interest to each other, and the world knows it. The world knows that's how the Jews treat each other. Now imagine if a non-Jew said to his friend, another non-Jew, hey, I need a loan. Well, he says, okay, but I'm going to charge you interest. So he says, well, where can I get a better rate? Oh, go to the Jews. They give everybody interest-free loans. So what's going to happen? The non-Jews would never learn the lesson. We are a light to the nations. We give each other interest-free loans because that's how you treat a brother. And I say a brother, we're talking about a brother from another mother. We're talking about distant cousins. We're talking about 63rd. Every Jew is a 63rd cousin of each other within. So we're talking about how a society should run. There's nothing like a Jewish society. There's nothing like the chesed. There used to be phone books, yellow pages? In Jerusalem, in Israel, the yellow pages had a thick section in the middle with gamachim. In other words, free loan funds, whether it was borrowing baby bottles on Shabbat or weekday, or chairs or tables or electrical equipment, whatever it is. A gamach is a free loan society where you can lend things, not just money, but also money, interest-free. I borrow 15 eggs, I have to give back 15 eggs. I can't give back 16 eggs. That's called interest. So Jews do this, and they do it to each other. And if they had to do it to everybody, they would milk the system. These non-Jews would just go ahead and tell their friends, don't borrow from me, because I'm going to charge you interest. Go to the non-Jew. They have to learn how to treat each other and give each other interest-free loans. This is an important lesson on how a society should run, how you should look at people. Obviously, business is business. When you're doing business, you become a partner in the business, and it could be you're going to benefit from that. But when a person comes to you and says, I need help, I'm down and out, awaken that heart of yours and figure out. And I'm talking to the non-Jew as well. It's up to you. It's not an obligation. But if you want to learn from the Jews, you want the wealth, this is how it's done. You give charity, and it will come back. I'm going to use the word. It's going to come back to bite you, which is interesting, because the word for interest is to bite. So if you give an interest-free loan, you will prosper. So this is chesed. The world is built on chesed. The Jews, it's very important that we're teaching the world this lesson. And I don't know where in the video I'm going to splice this in, but so we just mentioned that Shemitah is only observed according to the rabbis. There are opinions that we do on a Torah level, but first of all, even if we do it according to the rabbinic level, many of these, the nature of what's permissible or forbidden is mimicking what the Torah itself says. Therefore, we, at least when it comes to planting and harvesting, they're going to be the most machmir malachot, and then we have to mimic the rest, because there are opinions that even today it is the Raisa. But Yovel is not. That's clear. What happens on Shemitah years? So besides the idea of keeping with laying fallow the land, so we don't plant and we don't harvest, and there are many other things we don't do. We don't prune and we don't do other agricultural work, but also outstanding loans that are still due. So that is still in existence. Okay, so there is a way now. Just think about this. There's a concept. What is considered the land of Israel? So it's only in the land of Israel. So there are parts of the Arava. There's parts maybe of Gaza. There may be parts in the Golan Heights that is not Kedushat Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, there's a difference between when Joshua came and conquered, and of course King David is part of that. We'll call it the First Temple period. So we won those lands through war. I want you to compare war versus settlement. I know settlements is a big controversy today, but wait till you hear what I have to say. What holiness still remains of the land? When we came in with Joshua and we fought and we continued to get more land through battles, that was, we call that the first temple, the Kedusha, the holiness of the land of Israel, through Milchama of the first temple. Second temple period, we didn't have many wars. I don't think we had too many wars at all with the Goyim. It was only when they came to us and we reflected them. But we didn't have any of these expansionist wars during the second temple. And it was during that time that the holiness of the land of Israel came through settlement. And it was much smaller than when King David took over. So the big halakhic question, which holiness of the land of Israel is in existence? First temple, then we were exiled. And when we were exiled, the land did not contain its holiness. It was conquered through war, and if it was lost, it was lost. So that was we'll call that the greater Israel. That was the holiness then. Second temple period, it's through settlement, through civilization, creating roots, building homes, right? Like the settlements today. Jews living in the land. That creates the holiness. So the halacha is, we paskin that the second temple period is the halacha. Therefore, since it was much smaller than the first area, we do farming. During Shemitah, we're allowed to farm south of Beersheba, or east of, or south of Ashkelon. There's certain places, right? And in the Golan Heights, there's certain places. You have to check with your local Orthodox rabbi. But basically, Shemitah is only in Eretz Yisrael. And so I'm really impressed with these people all the way in Texas. But it's, anyway, let me just talk about Yovel. So Yovel Bizrat Hashem will come back in its full force. We'll actually observe it and count it, and there's a few other conditions. It will be in existence, we'll keep Shemitah Yovel, when the majority of the Jews live on the land of Israel, which if you're looking at your watch, it could be any day, right? There's ingather in the exiles, slowly but surely, not like a wall, but it's happening. And who knows, after what we see happening in Australia, America, Jews in Germany, New York, England, Australia, we have somebody from Texas. So a majority of Jews have to live in the land of Israel for Yovel to be enacted. Plus, there's a concept that it has to have the proper distribution of the tribes. The tribes have to be living in their respective territories. And that, perhaps we need Mashiach, perhaps we need Eliyahu Navi, and Bezrat Hashem, all that will come to be. Slaves, the laws of slaves, again, Jewish slaves, has to be enacted. It's also part of it. There's a connection. Because on the Yovel, right, the slaves who said they wanted to remain after the 6 years were up are for forever, but it doesn't mean forever. It means up until the Jubilee year. So the laws of slaves are definitely going to be enacted. As I mentioned already, so I already mentioned about the difference between war and settlement. So let's end here. I'm sure if anybody has any questions, they should write them down below in the comments, and we'll take a look at them. And I think, Bezrat Hashem, right, we should pray. We're talking about not just the ingathering the exiles, the rebuilding of the temple, the Mashiach should come, but until that time comes, and even after, the Torah will still be enacted. We have to learn how to treat our brother, right? Start with chesed. Chesed begins at home. Olam chesed Yiboneh. Our institute is set up to encourage people to do chesed, not just talk about, not just learn about, but actually implement chesed. And Bezrat Hashem will all continue to learn how to make it real. See, there is empathy and sympathy, but the bottom line is God told us to do it. We must do it, and it's enhancing when you have that sympathy and empathy and make sure that you treat your fellow. I mean, this is like the opposite, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. We learn, Rabbi Akiva says, right? And Hillel, don't do unto others that you don't want done unto you. This is the only way you really know. At the same time, do unto others as you would like have done unto yourself. And with that, I wish everyone not just a Shabbos, a good Shabbos, right, and a great life, but a very happy Mamish Simchadik Lag BaOmer, where we're really going to make the Torah of Rabbi Akiva as real as possible. And with that, see you next week. Have a great life. Yiboneh
Yiboneh HaMikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. יש שם שיר, שיר חדש,